The evening was supposed to be like every other Sunday dinner. It was a tradition in our family, one we'd kept for 30 years. My husband, Paul, says I measure my life in roast chickens, and maybe he's right. As I stood in the kitchen, wiping my hands on my apron, I could hear them all in the dining room. Paul, my husband, my rock, was at the head of the table, probably telling one of his long, winding stories that he's perfected over 40 years of marriage. My son Henry and his wife Brenda were there, and my daughter Ruth was home for the weekend. My heart felt full, almost bursting. My other son, Hosea, lives out of state with his family, and we miss him terribly. It makes these moments when I have almost all my chickens in the coop feel so precious. You get to my age, and you learn that family isn't just the important thing, it's the only thing. I brought out the chicken, golden brown, and the steam from the mashed potatoes fogged up my glasses. Paul smiled at me, that same smile that's made my knees weak since 1978. It looks wonderful, Bonita, he said. Mom, it smells amazing, Ruth added, already reaching for the gravy boat. Thanks, honey, I said, taking my seat. I looked around the table. Henry was laughing at something Paul said. Ruth was already piling food onto her plate. And then there was Brenda. She was pushing a green bean around with her fork, a small, tight smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. If I'm being completely honest, there's always been a tension there. A polite, brittle chill that settles in the air whenever my daughter and my daughter-in-law are in the same room. It's not something you can see. It's not like they fight. It's worse. It's the sound of a fork hitting a plate just a little too hard. It's the way they say, please, and thank you like they're weapons. Ruth is my daughter. She is salt of the earth, just like her father. She's loyal, she's honest, and she has no patience for nonsense. And whether I like it or not, she's always seen Brenda as nonsense. Brenda, on the other hand, has always been sensitive. She comes from a very different family. She's easily overwhelmed, and I think she's always seen our close-knit family as a threat, not a comfort. She sees Ruth's bluntness as judgment. She sees my questions as meddling. And me, for the last 7 years, I've been the peacemaker, the bridge over troubled water. I've spent more time than I can count on the phone, saying, Ruth, honey, just be nice, or Brenda, I'm sure she didn't mean it that way. I was tired of it, deep down, but what's a mother to do? You just want your children, all of them, to be happy. So I did what I always do. I tried to build a bridge. So, Henry, Brenda, I said, passing the roles, how is the house search coming along? It was an innocent question, or at least I meant it to be. Brenda stopped chewing. Her fork hung in the air for a second. It's fine, she said. Her voice was clipped. Henry, God bless him, jumped in immediately. He's always been a fixer, just like me. It's good, Mom. We saw a really nice colonial over on Elm Street on Saturday, didn't we, honey? Great backyard for a dog. Brenda didn't look at him. She was looking right at me. It was too small, she said. And the kitchen was dated. Everything was avocado green. Paul chimed in. Well, they call that retro now, don't they? Brenda just stared at me. Easy for you to say, she said, her voice quiet. You've been in this perfect house for 40 years. The perfect hung in the air. It didn't feel like a compliment. I smiled, though it felt strained. Oh, well, the right one will come along. These things just take time. You don't want to rush a decision that big. And that's when it happened. It wasn't a word. It was just a sound. From across the table, my daughter, Ruth, let out a tiny noise. A tisk. Just a small, sharp sound of air through her teeth. It was a sound of absolute, pure dismissal. It was the sound of here we go again. It was just loud enough for everyone to hear. Brenda's head snapped toward Ruth so fast, I thought she'd hurt her neck. Did you have something to say, Ruth? Brenda asked. Her voice was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of a rattlesnake before it strikes. Ruth, to her credit, didn't back down. She just shrugged, taking a sip of her water. I just think Mom was trying to be nice. Nice. Brenda repeated the word like it was a curse. And that was all it took. The thread snapped. Brenda slammed her fork down onto her plate. The crash of silver on china was so loud, we all jumped. Henry flinched. I am so sick of this, she yelled. Her voice wasn't quiet anymore. It was a raw, ragged shriek that filled the dining room. I am sick of this perfect, fake family. Brenda, honey, I started reaching a hand out. Please, lower your voice. No. She shot up from her chair, and it scraped back on the hardwood floor with a groan. Her face was bright red, and her eyes were wild. I will not lower my voice. I am done being quiet. I am done pretending. She pointed a shaking finger right at me. I hate your family. The words hit me like a slap. You Bonita, you're always meddling. How's the house? When are you having kids? Why don't you do it this way? You're always trying to control everything. Then she turned that pointing finger on my daughter. And you're always judging. Just sitting there with your smug little face, thinking you're so much better than me. You've hated me since day one. The room was dead silent. Paul was halfway out of his chair. Henry looked like he'd been shot. His face was white. You are toxic. Brenda screamed, tears of rage now streaming down her cheeks. Both of you. This whole family is toxic. You smother him. You've never let him go. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. I couldn't find my voice. I just stared at her, this girl I had welcomed into my home, this girl I had tried so hard to love. She looked at Henry, and her face crumpled, but it was an angry, ugly cry. Her voice dropped, but it was the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. Henry, I want a divorce. Those 4 words just hung in the air. They seemed to suck all the sound out of the room. For a second, nobody moved. It was like a terrible, frozen painting. My son, Henry, was still standing, pale as a ghost, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. My husband, Paul, was half out of his chair, his hand gripping the edge of the dining table, so hard his knuckles were white. He was looking at me, his eyes wide, asking a million questions without saying a word. I couldn't breathe. My heart, which had been hammering, just seemed to stop. But the silence was shattered, not by me and not by Paul. My daughter, Ruth, shot up from her chair, so fast it screeched against the floor and nearly tipped over. How dare you, she screamed. Her voice wasn't a shriek like Brenda's. It was a low, guttural roar, full of a rage I hadn't heard in years. How dare you speak to our mother like that? In her own house. Ruth's whole body was shaking. She pointed a trembling finger at the front door. Get out. We don't want you here. Get out. Brenda didn't even flinch. It was like Ruth's anger was just more fuel for her fire. She laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound that had no humor in it. See, she shrieked, jabbing her own finger right back at Ruth. This is exactly it. This is what I live with. Henry, you see this? She was talking to Henry, but her eyes were boring into Ruth. You think you're so high and mighty. You have always hated me. From day one, always trying to turn Henry against me, always whispering in his ear that I'm not good enough for this perfect family. Her wild eyes snapped back to me. I was still sitting frozen. You're all a bunch of bullies. You gang up on me. You think you're so perfect, don't you, Bonita? Sitting there in your castle, judging me. Well, you're not perfect. You're poison. Poison. That word hit me harder Then I hate you. Poison. I looked down at my hands in my lap. They were shaking. Not a little tremble, but a full-on, undeniable shake. I grabbed my cloth napkin and twisted it just to have something to hold on to. I've never been a calm woman. I'm a controlled woman. There's a difference. And in that moment, I could feel the control slipping out of my hands like sand. My whole life as a mother, my one job has been to stop the bleeding, to kiss the scraped knees, to mend the broken hearts, to fix it. And that instinct was screaming at me now. Fix this. Stop the fighting. Ruth, sit down, I said. My voice came out tight and thin. And Brenda, please, let's not do this. This isn't helping. Let's just all take a breath. I was in a crisis with 3 fronts. I had my furious, protective daughter on one side, ready to go to war for me. I had my hysterical, wounded daughter-in-law on the other, burning every bridge she could find. And in the middle was my son, my poor son, still standing there, a ghost in his own dining room, completely broken, as I looked at Brenda's face, twisted with an anger that was so deep it looked like it had been there for years. It was like I was seeing a ghost. This wasn't new. This was just louder. My mind flashed back, clear as day, to 2 years ago. It was Ruth's wedding. The reception was beautiful, the happiest day of my life, seeing my little girl so in love. The photographer was trying to get the big family portrait. He was lining us all up on the steps of the old country club. Okay, bridal party and parents, he called out, all cheerful. And Brenda, who was a bridesmaid, just stood there with her arms crossed. I can't, she said. It was just loud enough for all of us to hear. The photographer fumbled. Ma'am, this lighting is terrible, Brenda announced. And this dress, this color washes me out. I'll look sick. I'm not going to be in a picture where I look awful. Ruth's face, which had been glowing, just crumpled. Brenda, please, she hissed. It's the family photo. Brenda just shrugged. Well, I don't want to be in it. Henry, tell them. I'm not doing it. And Henry, my sweet Henry, had that same pale, panicked look he had on his face right now. Brenda, honey, he'd whispered. It's just one picture. For Ruth. It took me 20 minutes. 20 minutes of a family wedding with guests watching and the photographer's smile getting tighter and tighter while I stood in a side room and begged my daughter-in-law to please just come and stand in the picture. I told her she looked beautiful. I told her the lighting was lovely. I told her she was breaking Ruth's heart. She finally did it. She stalked out, stood in the back row, and put on a smile so fake and tight it looked like a snarl. I'd smoothed it over. I always smoothed it over. I told Ruth, she's just nervous. Honey, don't worry about it. I told Paul, it's just Brenda being Brenda. I told myself it was just a little quirk, a bit of insecurity. I looked at her now, screaming in my dining room. That wasn't a subtle sign. That was the first bomb. This was just the one that was finally taking the whole house down. This moment hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for 7 years. It was built on 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 moments where I'd made excuses for her, where Henry had looked the other way, where Ruth had bit her tongue until it bled. I snapped back to the present. Brenda was still standing there, breathing hard, her chest heaving. Ruth was still on her feet, vibrating with a rage that matched Brenda's. And Henry still hadn't moved. He still hadn't said a single word. He hadn't defended his wife. He hadn't defended his mother. He had just left the building. The screaming had stopped, but the silence that followed was 100 times worse. It was heavy and final. It was the sound of something breaking. Not a dish, not a glass, something much, much bigger. And I knew deep in my bones, this wasn't something I could fix. This wasn't a fight I could smooth over. This was the end of something. and I was terrified of what was coming next. Brenda's gaze was locked on me, her chest heaving. I could see the pulse beating in her throat, a frantic, angry bird. My own words from a moment ago, "Let's all take a breath," felt so stupid, so hollow. You can't ask a wildfire to take a breath. She tore her eyes away from me and from Ruth. My daughter was still standing, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, ready for a fight that was already lost. Brenda didn't even look at her. She didn't look at me. She ignored us completely, as if we were just furniture, as if we were nothing. She took 2 steps, closing the distance to my son. Henry was still standing by his chair, a statue of a man. He hadn't moved since she first screamed. He was just gone. Brenda stopped right in front of him. She was shorter than him, so she had to look up. But in that moment, she had all the power. Her voice dropped again, and this was the sound that would haunt my dreams. It was cold, sharp, and final. She pointed a shaking finger, not at him, but at the 3 of us. At me, at Paul, at Ruth. "Are you coming with me?" she hissed. "Or are you staying with them?" It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. It was the gallows. "It's them or me, Henry," she said. "Right now. Choose." And I watched my son, who I'd held on his first day of life, my son, who I'd taught to ride a bike, who I'd held when his first girlfriend broke his heart. I watched him stand in my dining room and get torn in two. His face was white, waxy. I could see a tiny bead of sweat on his temple. He looked at Brenda's face, twisted with this terrible rage. Then his eyes, they flickered to me. I will never, as long as I live, forget that look. It was terror. It was a silent, desperate scream. "Help me, Mom." But I couldn't. I was a mother, but I was also the woman she'd just accused. If I said one word, if I even moved, I would be proving Brenda right. I would be meddling. I would be controlling. So I sat there, my hands still twisting that napkin, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. I was paralyzed, too. His gaze slid past me to his sister. Ruth's face was no longer angry. It was just hurt, a deep, profound hurt. Her chin was trembling. She was watching her big brother, her hero, just stand there and let this woman destroy their mother. And finally, he looked at his father. Paul had his hands flat on the table, as if he was holding himself down. He just shook his head. Once, a tiny, slow motion of, "I can't help you, son. You're on your own." Henry was trapped, a mouse in a glass box, with 3 cats and a snake. His mouth opened. I saw his lips move, but no sound came out. He was completely, utterly broken. He just stood there, vibrating with a silent panic. The silence in the room was so thick, I felt like I was drowning in it. It stretched for 1 second, 2, 3. Brenda waited, and in that wait, her face changed. The wild anger began to cool, replaced by something much worse. Contempt, a cold, hard disgust. She didn't scream again. She just scoffed. It was a short, bitter sound. "You're pathetic," she said. The word was so quiet, but it was the cruelest blow of the entire night. She turned on her heel. She didn't look at anyone else. She grabbed her purse from the back of her chair. I watched her, numb. She walked out of the dining room. I heard her quick, angry steps on the hardwood floor of the entryway. Then the front door was yanked open with such force that a gust of cold night air blew into the room, rattling the china in my cabinet. And she slammed it. She slammed that door, so hard the whole house shook. A picture frame on the wall of the living room, a photo of all my children at Hosea's graduation, rattled and tipped sideways. The sound of that slam, it was a gunshot. It was the sound of the end. And that sound, that violent final crack, is what finally broke Henry's spell. He jumped, as if he'd been physically struck. The ghost was gone. My son was back, and he was in a blind panic. He gasped. I have to. He wasn't talking to me. He wasn't talking to Paul. He wasn't talking to Ruth. He was just making a sound like an animal. I have to go. Henry. Ruth's voice was a small, broken whisper. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. The shame was all over his face. He just turned, his movements clumsy, and ran. He didn't walk. He ran. Out of the dining room. Through the entryway. We heard the front door open again, this time with a frantic, desperate pull. And then we heard him slam it shut, too. We sat there, stunned. The three of us. The sound of Brenda's car engine roaring to life. Tires squealing on the pavement. Then, a second later, Henry's car chasing after her. And then silence. The most terrible, heavy, complete silence I have ever known. I looked at the table. The roast chicken was half-carved. The mashed potatoes were getting cold. Brenda's chair was tipped over. Ruth's napkin was on the floor. It was the wreckage. It was the aftermath of the explosion. Ruth finally sank back into her chair. Her face was as white as her brother's had been. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. Mom, she whispered. I opened my mouth. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. I wanted to say they would be back, that he would call, that this was all a terrible mistake. I wanted to say all the things a mother is supposed to say, but I couldn't, because in that moment, looking at my husband's stunned face and my daughter's broken one, I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was the end. And the only thing I could do was sit there in the ruins of my perfect Sunday dinner and finally let my own hands shake. The ringing silence after the second car, door slammed, was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a hole being ripped in our family. I just sat there, staring at the middle of the table, at the gravy boat and the half-eaten bread rolls. My hands were in my lap, clenched so tight my nails were biting into my palms. Ruth was the first one to move. She didn't just stand up. She shot up, her chair scraping the floor with a sound that made me wince. Her face, which had been hurt and shocked, was now a hard mask of pure anger. Good riddance, she snapped. Her voice was sharp. I hope she never sets foot in this house again. Ruth, Paul started, his voice a low warning. No, Dad, she said, turning on him. I'm not going to be quiet. Not this time. Did you hear what she said to Mom? Toxic? Poison? After everything Mom has done for her, I am sick of walking on eggshells around her. I am sick of watching her bully Mom and manipulate Henry. She stormed over to the sideboard and started grabbing plates, not to clear them, but to have something to do with her hands. She slammed them down, and the clatter was as violent as Brenda's screaming. And Henry, how could he just run after her after she said those things to you, Mom? She looked right at me, her eyes flashing with a mix of loyalty and a deep, bitter disappointment. He's a coward. That is enough, Paul said. His voice was quiet, but it had an edge of steel that stopped Ruth cold. He'd never been a yeller, my Paul. He didn't have to be. He got up from his chair, the tall, solid man I'd loved for 40 years, and walked around the table to me. Your mother is in shock, he said, his eyes on Ruth. And you are not helping. Ruth's anger just broke. Her face crumpled, and she looked like she was 10 years old again. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered, her chin trembling. I hate her so much for what she just did to you. I know, honey, I finally said. My voice was a dry, rusty whisper. Paul put his hands on my shoulders from behind and squeezed, just once. He leaned down, and I felt his warm breath against my hair. "We'll face this, Bonita," he murmured, his voice for me, and me alone. "Together. This is not all on you." I leaned my head back against his chest and let my eyes close for just 1 second. He was my anchor. He always has been. He wasn't telling me it would be okay. He wasn't telling me what to do. He was just there, holding the line. My phone, sitting on the table next to my untouched plate, suddenly buzzed. The vibration against the wood was loud in the terrible quiet. We all froze. My heart gave a painful leap. Henry! He was calling. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. But the name on the screen wasn't Henry. It was Hosea, my other son, my sweet, gentle son who lived 5 states away, my peacemaker who hated conflict more than anything in the world. A wave of exhaustion hit me. I didn't have the strength to tell this story again. I didn't have the strength to manage his feelings from 500 miles away. "It's Hosea," I said to Paul, my voice flat. Paul sighed, a deep, weary sound. He must have heard. "Ruth, did you text your brother?" Ruth had the decency to look down at her feet. I sent him a text. She mumbled. "I just said Brenda blew up," and left. "Ruth," Paul said, shaking his head. "He had a right to know," she fired back, her anger returning. The phone buzzed again, insistent. I knew he'd just keep calling. I finally pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear. "Hi, honey." "Mom? What's going on?" Hosea's voice was a mile a minute, full of that anxious energy he's always had. "Ruth sent me a crazy text. What happened? Is everyone okay? She said Brenda blew up." I sank back into my chair. How could I possibly explain this? "Oh, Hosea," I said, and my voice cracked. "It was bad, honey. It was really bad." "What do you mean, bad? What did she do?" "Ruth said she left." "She did," I said. I took a shaky breath, trying to get the words out. "She screamed at me. She screamed at Ruth. She called us toxic. She told Henry she wants a divorce." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could just picture him pacing his kitchen, rubbing his hand over his face. "Oh, Mom," he finally said, his voice dropping. "Oh, geez. A divorce? What on earth did you say to her?" The question was so innocent, and it was so insulting. It hit me like a little dart. What did I say? I didn't say anything. Hosea. I asked her how the house hunt was going. Right, no, I know, Mom," he said, backpedaling fast. "I just mean, you know how she is. She's always been so high-strung. She's really sensitive." A cold, hard feeling started to creep up my back, pushing aside the shock. "Sensitive, Hosea? She called me poison. She screamed, 'I hate your family,' in the middle of Sunday dinner." "I know, Mom. I know that's terrible. I'm not defending her. But a divorce? That's a huge overreaction. She must be really, really upset. Are you sure you can't just smooth it over?" I was speechless. I just stared at the wall. "Smooth it over? What does that even mean?" "I just mean," he said, his voice pleading, "maybe that was just the anger talking. You know, maybe if you just called her, just apologize. Whatever she thinks you did, just say you're sorry and you want to talk. It's not worth blowing up the whole family over, is it? It's not worth losing Henry. Apologize." He wanted me to apologize. He wanted me to call the woman who had just detonated a bomb in my home and say, I was sorry. My hand was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. "Hosea, you weren't here. You didn't see her face. You didn't hear what she said." "I know I wasn't, Mom, and I'm sorry. I hate this. I hate all of you fighting. Please, Mom, just be the bigger person. You always are. Just fix it. Please. Be the bigger person. That's a mother's life sentence. isn't it? Be the bigger person. Smooth it over. Fix it. I'd been fixing it for 7 years. I have to go, honey, I said, my voice as cold and flat as I'd ever heard it. I'll call you tomorrow. Mom, wait, don't. I hung up. I just tapped the red button, disconnecting the call, and dropped the phone onto the table like it was on fire. I was being torn in two. My daughter, Ruth, was on one side, sharpening spears, ready for war. My son, Hosea, was on the other, begging me to wave a white flag and surrender just to keep the peace. Paul looked at me. He'd heard my side of the conversation. He knew exactly what Hosea had said. He wants you to apologize, he stated. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. Ruth made a sound of pure disgust. Apologize? For what? For breathing? For existing in her world? He's far away, Ruth, Paul said, rubbing his eyes. He just wants the fighting to stop. He doesn't understand. I stood up from the table. I couldn't sit there another second. I looked at Paul, at my husband, the only person in the world who wasn't pulling me in some direction, who was just there. I'm not calm, Paul, I said, and my voice was shaking with a sudden, hot fury that was so strong it scared me. I am so angry I can barely see straight, and I am terrified. I am terrified that I've lost my son. I'm terrified that this is it, that this is the moment our family just shatters. It won't, he said, and he pulled me into his arms. We are not shattering. I buried my face in his shirt, and I wasn't Bonita the peacemaker. I wasn't Bonita the bigger person. I was just a woman, 65 years old, furious and terrified, holding on to my husband while my world fell apart. And as Paul held me, my phone, still on the table, buzzed one more time. Ruth picked it up. Her voice was quiet. Mom, it's a text. It's from Henry. My heart stopped. I pulled away from Paul, my hands like ice. I walked over and looked down at the screen. It was one short, terrible message. It's a mess, Mom. She's serious. She's packing a bag. I don't know what to do. Just give me a few days to talk to her. Please. Don't call. I'll handle it. Please. Please. That word again. He was begging me for time. Hosea was begging me for peace. Ruth was begging me for a fight. And I stood there, looking at my son's desperate plea, and I had never felt so alone or so lost in my entire life. Paul and I went to bed, but we didn't sleep. We just lay there, side by side in the dark, in the quiet house that had always been our sanctuary, and now felt like a war zone. Paul held my hand. He didn't say, "It will be okay." He didn't offer any empty words. He just held my hand. I was grateful for that. After an hour, his breathing evened out, and he finally drifted off. But not me. My eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows from the trees outside dance on the wall. My mind was a hornet's nest. I just kept hearing all of them. Ruth, furious and loyal. He's a coward, Mom. Hosea, so far away. So desperate for a peace that didn't exist. Can't you just apologize, Mom? Just fix it. And Henry, my son, his text message, glowing in my memory. Just give me a few days to talk to her. Please, give me a few days. How many days had I given? I lay there in the dark, and it was like a floodgate opened. I remembered every few days Henry had ever asked for. The time, 3 years ago, when Brenda forgot our 40th anniversary party. The party Henry had helped plan. She'd decided at the last minute she had a migraine, and Henry stayed home with her. He'd called me, his voice so tired. She's not feeling well, Mom. I'll make it up to you. Just give us a few days. The time at Ruth's wedding, after I'd spent 20 minutes begging her to be in the photo, Henry had pulled me aside later. Thanks for handling that, Mom. She's just She gets overwhelmed. It'll be fine. Just give it a few days. It was always a few days. A few days to let the tantrum pass. A few days to let the cruelty be forgotten. A few days to sweep the broken glass under the rug so we could all pretend the house wasn't falling apart. And I realized, lying there in the dark, that Henry wasn't a fixer. He was a prisoner. He wasn't asking for time to solve the problem. He was asking for time for us to get over it. He was a man trapped in a burning building, asking everyone to please ignore the smoke. And I, his mother, had enabled it. I had been so desperate for peace, so afraid of that final, terrible explosion, that I had helped him. I was the one smoothing it over. I was the one being the bigger person. Hosea's words came back to me. Just fix it. I looked at the clock on the nightstand. The red numbers glowed. 3:17 a.m. And something inside me just snapped. It wasn't anger. The anger was gone. It was just certainty, a cold, hard, terrible clarity. It settled over me like a heavy blanket. I knew, with a certainty that was as sure as the sun coming up, that my son would never leave her. He would let her poison him. He would let her isolate him. He would let her destroy his relationship with his sister, his brother, his father, and me, all for the hope of a quiet life that would never come. And she, in turn, would keep him. She would keep him as a shield, as a weapon, and as a prize, all to prove that she had won. A mother's job is to protect her children. I had thought that meant protecting them from scrapes and falls, from bullies, from a broken heart. I never realized that one day I might have to protect my son from his own wife. Or maybe I had to protect him from himself. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Not anymore. I slipped out of bed. The floor was cold under my feet. I didn't wake Paul. This was my burden. This was my choice. I walked out of our bedroom and down the dark hall, the moonlight from the landing window making a path on the wooden floor. I went into the little room we use as a study, the one with the old oak desk where I pay the bills and write my Christmas cards. I sat down in the chair. It groaned softly. I turned on the small desk lamp, and the sudden pool of light felt too bright. I opened my laptop. It took a moment to hum to life, and I found the email for our family lawyer, Mr. Gable. He's a good man. He handled our wills. My fingers hovered over the keys. I took one deep breath. This was it. The point of no return. I was no longer the peacemaker. I was no longer the bigger person. I started to type. Dear Mr. Gable, I am writing to you at this hour because the matter is urgent. Please begin divorce proceedings for my son, Henry, from his wife, Brenda. Please retain your services on his behalf. Send the retainer invoice and all correspondence directly to me. I will speak with Henry in the morning. Sincerely, Bonita. I read it over once. It was cold. It was final. It was the hardest thing I had ever written. I clicked send. The little swoosh sound was the only noise in the house. I don't know how long I sat there. I just stared at the screen. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel happy. I felt like I had just pushed one of my own children off a cliff just to save him from being burned alive. I didn't go back to bed. I just sat in that chair and watched the dark, blue-black sky slowly turn to a bruised, gray dawn. I was in the kitchen on my second cup of coffee when Paul came down. He saw me at the table, still in my nightgown, staring into a mug. He didn't say good morning. He just came over, poured his own coffee, and sat down across from me. He looked at my face, at my eyes, and I think he knew I hadn't slept. I did something, Paul. I said. My voice was a dead-flat monotone. I know, he said, and he just waited. I emailed Mr. Gable. At 3 this morning, I told him to start the divorce. I told him to send the bill to me. Paul was very still. He looked down into his black coffee for a long, long time. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then he finally raised his eyes to mine. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His hand was so warm. It's a hard choice, Bonita, he said, his voice rough with sleep. It's a hard, terrible choice, but it might be the only one. And I'm with you. Whatever happens, I am with you. I squeezed his hand, and then I picked up my phone. I had to do it before I lost my nerve. I found Henry's name, and I pressed call. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was exhausted and groggy. Mom, it's 7 a.m. What's wrong? Henry, I said, and I was amazed at how steady my voice sounded. I need you to listen to me. I've called Mr. Gable. Who? What are you talking about? Mr. Gable, our lawyer. I've retained him for you. The divorce proceedings are starting today. Silence. Just a dead, stunned silence. And then his voice no longer groggy, but sharp with panic and a new, rising anger. You what? What did you say? I've started the divorce. Henry, you can't. Mom, you can't do that. I asked you to wait. I told you to wait. I told you I would handle it. You went behind my back. You can't just do that. It's my marriage. And I heard him. I heard the betrayal in his voice. I heard his pain. And it was the sound of a mother breaking her own son's heart. But I was the only one who could. I closed my eyes. My voice was firm, but it was aching for him. I did what you were unable to do. Henry, she declared war on our family last night. I am just accepting her surrender. Henry cursed. I heard a short, sharp, ugly word. And then the line went dead. He'd hung up on me. I stood in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand. Paul was watching me, his face grim. He's angry, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He'll be more than angry, Bonita, Paul said, taking the phone from my hand and placing it on the counter. He'll be hurt. He'll be confused. But you did what you thought was right. Did I? I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. I just forced my son into a divorce. What kind of mother does that? Before Paul could answer, my phone buzzed_Z on the counter. It was a text, not from Henry. It was from Ruth. Heard the news from Henry. It's about time, Mom. Don't let her take him to the cleaners. Tell Mr. Gable to fight for everything. I just stared at the message. Triumphant. She was happy. She was ready for a war I had just started. I showed the phone to Paul. He just shook his head, his jaw tight. And as if on cue, the phone started ringing. The caller ID was Hosea. A wave of dread washed over me. I couldn't have this conversation again. I couldn't defend myself to another one of my children. I just looked at the ringing phone, my heart pounding. Paul saw the look on my face. He picked up the phone, pressed the green button, and put it on speaker. Hosea, he said, his voice firm. It's your father. Dad, what is going on? I just got off the phone with Henry. He's a mess. He said Mom hired a lawyer. He said she's forcing him to get a divorce. What is wrong with you guys? That's insane. Hosea's voice was high and panicked, just as it had been the night before. Son, Paul said, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife. You were not here. You did not see what happened. You did not hear what was said to your mother. But Dad, you can't force a divorce. That's not how it works. That's wrong. You're supposed to be the grown-ups. You're supposed to be fixing this, not blowing it up. I flinched. You're supposed to be fixing this. Paul didn't flinch. Hosea, your mother did what she felt she had to do to protect a member of this family. You don't have to agree with it, but you're not going to call this house and yell at her about it. She's been through enough. But Dad. No, Paul said. It was the quietest, most final word I'd ever heard him say. We will talk to you when you can speak to us with respect. We are not arguing with you. This is done. He hung up. I just stared at him. My husband, my anchor. He was building a wall around me. He was standing guard. And we needed it. Because in the next hour, the real war began. My phone lit up again. And Ruth's. And as I would find out later, even Hosea's. It was Brenda. She had found out about the lawyer. The first text I got was just a string of furious, misspelled words. You are a psycho mother from hell. You will not ruin my life. You will pay for this, you old witch. Then another one came. You think you can steal my husband? He hates you. He told me. He hates all of you. You just proved I was right. You are a controlling, toxic monster. I felt sick. My hands were shaking so hard I had to put the phone face down. Paul, I whispered. Don't read them, Bonita, he said, his voice gentle. Block the number. Right now. But what if Henry? Henry knows your number. If he wants to talk, he will call. Just then, Ruth called my phone. I didn't have the strength not to answer. Mom, are you getting these? She's completely lost it. She's sending me pictures of furniture, saying this is what she's taking. She's saying she's going to tell everyone you're senile. Ruth, I said, my voice cracking. Stop. Please. Just stop. No, Mom, we have to fight this. I'm calling Henry. I'm going to tell him. You will do no such thing, Paul said, his voice loud enough for the phone to pick up. Ruth, you stand down. You let the lawyers handle it. You are not to engage. Not with her, and not with Henry. Am I understood? Your mother is at her limit. You will not add to it. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Yes, Dad, she finally said, her voice small. Okay. The day was a blur. I just sat at my kitchen table, feeling like I was in the eye of a hurricane. My daughter thought I was a hero. My youngest son thought I was a monster. My daughter-in-law was trying to destroy me. And my oldest son, Henry, he was just gone. He didn't call. He didn't text. By evening, I was a wreck. The guilt and the certainty I'd felt at 3 a.m. were just a churning, sick mess in my stomach. The guilt was winning. What if I've just lost him, Paul? I whispered, as we were clearing the dinner we'd barely touched. What if I just pushed him away forever? What if he's with her right now, and they're both just hating me? He's not with her, Paul said, his back to me as he rinsed a plate. How do you know? He ran after her. He's not with her, Paul said again, turning around. He's at the Marriott over by the highway. I just stared at him. How do you know that? He used my credit card for the room. Paul said simply, the charge came through about an hour after he called you this morning. My legs went weak again. I sat down. He wasn't with her. He was angry at me, furious at me, betrayed by me, but he wasn't with her. He was in a neutral, sterile hotel room. He was caught in the middle, furious at my control, but also, I saw it, just for a second, he was free. He was safe. He was finally out of that burning house. And I had a tiny, secret, profound feeling of relief. I had my anger and my guilt, but I also had this little spark of, thank God he's out. Paul came over and put his hands on my shoulders, just as he had the night before. He stood behind me, a solid, warm wall. I started, and my voice broke. I feel terrible, and I feel right. I don't know how to be both. You don't have to, he said, his voice a low rumble in my ear. That's my job for now. You did it, Bonita. You threw the stone. Now we just have to stand here together and endure the ripples. I leaned my head back against him and closed my eyes. The ripples were already turning into waves. And I was so tired. The weeks that followed were a blur of angry phone calls, tense silence, and lawyers' letters. The ripples from the stone I'd thrown had turned into a tidal wave, and my family was just trying to keep its head above water. Henry was speaking to me, but it wasn't the way it used to be. It was strained. It was the way you talk to a coworker you have to partner with on a project you both hate. He was still in his hotel room. He'd told me in a flat, monotone voice that he'd filed a police report when Brenda had shown up at the Marriott and tried to break down his door. He wasn't angry at me anymore. Not really. The fury he'd had on the phone that morning had been burned out of him, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. He was just hollow. And then the real war began. Brenda, having realized that Henry was not running back to her, that her screaming and tears weren't going to work, had hired a lawyer. And this lawyer was, as Paul put it, a shark. The first letter we got wasn't a divorce filing. It was a declaration of war. I read it in my kitchen, my hands starting to shake just like they had that night. But this was a different shaking. It was a cold, hard anger. My client, Mr. Gable, read it to us over the phone, is seeking full ownership of the marital home, the 2024 SUV, and significant spousal support. Furthermore, we are filing for damages due to years of emotional distress, psychological manipulation, and a toxic family enmeshment. He kept reading, but my brain snagged on that phrase. Toxic enmeshment. She was using the very words she had screamed at me as a legal strategy. She was painting herself as the victim. The woman who had come into my home and called me poison was now suing me for emotional distress. The sheer nerve of it almost took my breath away. I looked at Henry, who was sitting at my kitchen table, his head in his hands. He'd been silent for 10 minutes. Finally, he looked up, and his face, it was the first real emotion I'd seen in him in weeks. It was pure, unfiltered disgust. She really thinks she's the victim here, doesn't she? He said, his voice a low rasp. After all of it, after the wedding, after every single Sunday dinner, after screaming at my mother, he couldn't even finish. He just shook his head. Okay, Mr. Gable, what's next? And in that moment, I saw my son change. His anger at my control was finally completely overshadowed by his anger at her lies. He was no longer a man trapped between two women. He was just a man who had been pushed too far. Which is how we ended up in that beige, airless conference room at the mediator's office 2 weeks later. It wasn't a courtroom, but it felt just as cold. I was there. Henry was there. Mr. Gable was there. Paul had driven us. He wasn't in the room. We'd agreed this was just for the people directly involved, but I knew he was in the lobby reading a 3-week-old magazine, a solid, immovable mountain. I was not the shaking woman from the dinner party. I had spent the last 2 weeks talking to Paul, to Mr. Gable, and to God. I wasn't the grieving mother. I wasn't the peacemaker. I was, as Paul had said, the one who threw the stone. And I was there to see where it landed. I wore my good blue suit, the one I'd worn to my last job interview 10 years ago. I felt calm. But it wasn't the calm of peace. It was the calm of a general. Brenda and her lawyer came in. She was playing a new role. The screaming, furious woman was gone. In her place was a tiny, wounded bird. She was dressed in a gray sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look young and frail. She sat down. She would not look at Henry, and she would not, under any circumstances, look at me. Her lawyer laid it all out again. The demands, the house, the car, the money, and then the emotional damages. He used phrases like immense suffering and pattern of control. Mr. Gable Our lawyer pulled out his file, ready to argue. He cleared his throat, and I held up my hand. Just a small, quiet gesture. Mr. Gable stopped. Henry looked at me. Even Brenda's lawyer paused. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I looked past the lawyers, past the mediator, and I looked directly at Brenda. I held her gaze until she was forced, finally, to look back at me. Her eyes were full of hate. Good. At least it was honest. Then, I turned my gaze to the mediator. We are not here to argue about feelings, I said, and my voice was as steady as a rock. We are here to end this. We will be fair. We are offering a 50-50 split of all marital assets. Down the middle. The house will be sold, the money divided. The cars will be valued. Everything 50-50. No more, no less. I took a breath. We will not be paying for emotional damages. We will not be extorted. If this very fair offer is not accepted right now, we will see you in court. And I promise you, I let my eyes drift back to Brenda. All of this will be made public. Every text, every voicemail. We will happily discuss the pattern of behavior that led us here. The choice is yours. The room was absolutely silent. The threat hung in the air. A court battle. Witnesses. Ruth. Paul. My son, Hosea. All of them on the record talking about that dinner. Talking about the wedding. Talking about 7 years of her being Brenda. Brenda's mask of the wounded bird just shattered. I saw her face get red. I saw her jaw clench. Her lawyer started whispering furiously in her ear. She was whispering back, her voice a sharp, angry hiss. She knew, and I knew, that her victim story wouldn't survive 5 minutes of cross-examination. She had no power here but the power to make noise, and I had just taken that away from her. My client finds this aggression. Her lawyer started. Just take it. Brenda snapped, her voice suddenly loud and raw, the voice I remembered from my dining room. Just take the deal. I don't care. I just want out. I just want to be away from this. This family. She grabbed the pen from the table and signed the agreement. Her lawyer slid in front of her, her hand shaking with so much rage the signature was just a black scrawl. She didn't wait for him. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the conference room, slamming the door behind her. And she was gone. We were left in the silence. Mr. Gable let out a long, slow breath. He shuffled his papers, a small smile on his face. Well, he said, that was efficient. Congratulations, Henry. You're a free man. We walked out of the building, Henry and I. We stepped out of the dark, air-conditioned office and into the bright, hot afternoon sunshine. It was so bright, I had to blink. We just stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, the city sounds rushing past us. A bus hissing, people talking on their phones. Henry was just still. He didn't say anything. He was looking at a bus as it pulled away from the curb. He wasn't sad. He wasn't happy. He was just empty. He stood there for what felt like a long time. And then he let out a breath. It wasn't a sigh. It was a deep, shuddering exhale that seemed to come from the soles of his feet. A breath he had been holding, I realized, for 7 years. It's over, he said. His voice was quiet. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a celebration. It was just a fact. The period at the end of a long, terrible sentence. He finally turned and looked at me, and his eyes, they were just clear. The anger was gone. The confusion was gone. The betrayal was gone. It wasn't replaced by love, not yet. It wasn't thank you, but it was understanding. He saw me. He saw the woman who had made that 3 a.m. call, the woman who had just sat there like a general, and he finally understood why. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't have to. He just nodded. Once, a quick, sharp movement. Can you give me a ride back to my car?" It was a start. "Can you give me a ride back to my car?" It was a start. Those were the first real words, the first crack in the ice. The weeks after that were quiet. The world didn't just snap back into place. The hurricane was over, but we were all just walking around the wreckage, picking up the pieces. Henry had stayed at the Marriott for 2 weeks, and then he'd found a small, furnished apartment across town. He called me once a week, and then twice. The calls were stiff, awkward. We'd talk about the weather. We'd talk about his work. We never, ever talked about that night. We talked around it. Ruth was still angry. Not at me, but for me. And at Henry for his silence. Hosea, my son so far away, was just quiet. He'd stopped calling, and I think he was just waiting to see who was left standing. It was a slow, painful process. But bit by bit, the ice started to melt. Henry mentioned, in one of our strained calls, that he'd talked to someone. A Dr. Riley. He said it offhand, like he was talking about the dentist. But I knew what it meant. He was getting help. He was starting to heal. And so was I. 6 months. That's how long it's been. 6 months since that terrible, awful night. And it's Sunday again. I'm in my kitchen, and a roast chicken is in the oven. The smell is the same. The house is the same. But everything is different. I'm setting the table, and I only put out 3 plates. Me, Paul, and Ruth. Ruth has been coming every Sunday. She's my shadow, my protector. We sit down to eat, and it's quiet. But it's not the bad, heavy silence of that night. It's a peaceful quiet. It's the sound of a house that is no longer holding its breath. We're not walking on eggshells. We're not bracing for an explosion. We're just eating. "Paul," I say, passing him the potatoes, "did you remember to look at those flights to Arizona?" "I did," he says, smiling. "February looks good. We can finally go see the desert." Ruth laughs. "You too, going on a vacation. What's next? You going to start riding motorcycles?" "Don't give your father any ideas," I say, and we all laugh. It's a real laugh. We talk about Hosea's kids. His daughter had just scored her first goal in soccer. He'd sent us a video. He was talking to us again. The family was still fractured, but the pieces were starting to find their way back. It was in that moment, in that peaceful, normal quiet, that the doorbell rang. We all froze. It was 7 p.m. We weren't expecting anyone. Paul looked at me. Ruth's smile faded. Her hand tensed on her fork. She had that "who's here to hurt my mother now" look on her face. "I'll get it," Paul said, putting his napkin down and getting up. We heard his footsteps in the hall. We heard the front door open. We heard a low mumble of voices. I couldn't make out the words. Then Paul's voice, clear and steady. "Well, come on in, son. There's plenty left." My heart didn't stop. It just gave a great, painful lurch in my chest. I stood up, my hands gripping the back of my chair. Henry walked into the dining room. He looked different. He was thinner, maybe 10 pounds. But his face, his eyes were clear. The constant, hunted, exhausted look was gone. He looked present. He was wearing a new shirt, one I'd never seen before. Ruth was still sitting, her back ramrod straight. She was looking at him, not with anger, but with a deep, cautious hesitation. She was still my defender, and she wasn't sure if he was friend or foe. "Henry," I said. My voice was shaky. It's good to see you." "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was quiet. "Hi, Ruth." Ruth just nodded. "Henry." Paul came up behind him, carrying a plate from the kitchen. "Here you go," he said, handing it to him. "Sit down. Eat." It was that simple, powerful, fatherly command. And Henry did. He sat down in his old chair, the one that had been empty for 6 months. It was awkward. terribly, painfully awkward. But it was okay. We made small talk. He told us about his new apartment. It was small, but it was on the top floor and had a good view. He told us about a new project at his job. He told us, looking at his plate, that therapy was a lot of work, but that Dr. Riley was okay. Ruth slowly unclenched. She started to ask him questions. Simple ones. Do you have a new couch yet? How's your car running? He was here. It wasn't a party. It wasn't a celebration. But he was at Sunday dinner. And he was sober. And he was sane. After dinner, I was in the kitchen. It's my habit. I start cleaning. I was running the hot water, my hands in the sink, just stacking the plates. I was alone, just listening to the quiet murmur of Paul and Ruth talking to Henry in the other room. I heard footsteps. Henry was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. He just watched me for a second. You don't have to do those now, Mom, he said. It's no trouble, I said, my back to him. He didn't leave. He walked into the kitchen, over to the drawer by the stove, and pulled out a dish towel. He stood next to me. He picked up a wet plate from the rack I'd just washed. We stood there, side by side. The only sound was the running water and the clink of a glass as I washed it. He was the one who broke the silence. His voice was low, and he didn't look at me. He was just drying the same plate over and over. I was so angry at you for a long time, Mom. My hand stopped moving in the warm, soapy water. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I know, I whispered. He said, and his voice was rough. I was furious. I've never been that angry. You went behind my back. You made a decision for me. You just blew up my life. My eyes stung, and I just nodded, still staring into the sink. I know, I said again, my voice thick. I know I did. I took that choice from you. He was quiet. He finally put the plate down and picked up another. Yeah, he said. You did. He stopped drying, his hands still. And I have to be honest. I don't know if I ever would have been brave enough to do it myself. I finally turned my head to look at him. He was looking right at me. And for the first time in 10 years, I saw my son. Not the trapped husband, not the terrified ghost. My son. His eyes were watery. I think, he said, his voice breaking. I think I would have stayed, Mom. I think I would have stayed until there was nothing left of me. I was so scared. I would have stayed. He took a deep, shuddering breath. So, thank you. My heart it broke, and it healed all in the same second. My eyes filled with tears, and they spilled over, running down my cheeks. I reached out, my hands still dripping with soap and water, and I put my hand on his arm. You're welcome, baby, I whispered. He didn't hug me. I didn't hug him. He just picked up the next plate. And we stood there, side by side. And we finished the dishes. We stood there for a long time, just the two of us, mother and son, in a quiet kitchen, with the dishes finally done. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. There was no big, tearful hug. He didn't say, I'll be here next Sunday. He just left. He said, I'll talk to you later, Mom. And he walked out the front door. And I stood at the window and watched him get into his car and drive away. But this time, I wasn't terrified. It's been a few weeks since that night, and I've had a lot of time to sit and think. This has been, without a doubt, the hardest, ugliest, most painful year of my life. When you raise your children, you have these dreams for them. You want them to be happy, to be healthy, to find love. You never, ever build a scenario in your head where you are the one sitting at a desk at 3 o'clock in the morning, holding a metaphorical knife and cutting that love right out of their life. I have spent so many nights lying next to Paul, just staring at the ceiling, my heart aching, not just for Henry, my son Hosea, my peacemaker, he's still distant. We talk, but it's not the same. He still doesn't understand. He's a good man, and he loves his family, but he's a man who has never had to live in a war zone. He sees the world in black and white. Families should stick together. Mothers shouldn't meddle. He lives 500 miles away, and from there, what I did looks monstrous. He hears Mom force my brother to get a divorce, and in his mind, I've become the villain. I have to live with that. I have to live with the fact that in my effort to save one son, I may have damaged my relationship with another. And then there's my Ruth, my fierce, loyal daughter. She saw what I did as a victory. She was ready to throw a party. She wanted to fight. And I had to be the one to tell her, the war is over. Put the weapons down. It's a strange thing, as a mother, to have to manage your child's fury, especially when that fury is on your behalf. She was so ready to hate Henry for walking out, so ready to hate Brenda for existing. I had to spend weeks, months, gently reminding her that our family's job is not to win, but to heal. That was a battle all on its own. And Henry, the risk I took, the terror of that 3 a.m. email. When I hit send, I had to make my peace with the fact that I might never, ever have a real conversation with my son again. I had to accept that he might hate me. He might be so angry at my control that he would choose her just to spite me. Or, just as bad, that he would be so broken by the two of us that he would just disappear from our lives. That was the real gamble. That was the cost. I have been called a lot of things in my life. A wife, a mother, a friend. But in the last 6 months, I've had to learn to live with a new word, meddling. I'm sure there are people who would hear this story and say, that's a controlling mother-in-law. She proved Brenda right. Maybe they're right. I'll never know. What I do know is that a mother's job is not as simple as people think. It's not all soft hands and gentle words. It's not all baking cookies and kissing scraped knees. When they're little, you protect their bodies. When they're grown, you have to try to protect their souls, their lives. And that is a much, much messier job. Sometimes a mother's love isn't gentle. Sometimes it's a hard, debatable, awful choice. It's being willing to be the bad guy. It's being willing to have your other children get angry with you. It's being willing to be the one person in the room who sees the fire coming and starts screaming, even if everyone else tells you you're ruining the party. Brenda was a fire, but she wasn't the real fire. The real fire was my son's paralysis. It was his fear. It was his inability to save himself. I didn't just push her out of the house. I pushed him out of the burning building. And yes, I did it by going behind his back. I did it by taking away his choice. But I did it because I had watched him for 7 years choose to stay in the smoke. I still lie awake some nights. I do. I lie there, and I hear Paul's steady breathing next to me, and I wonder if there was another way, a better way, a way that wouldn't have cost my family so much pain. Did I overstep my bounds as a mother, or did I do what any mother would have to do when she saw her child drowning? That's the question, isn't it? It's the one I just can't seem to answer. And that's my story. It was not easy to tell, and I thank you for listening. If you've ever been in a situation like this, if this story touched you, or even if it made you angry, please let me know. I truly want to know. Tell me in the comments. What would you have done? And if you'd like to hear more stories, please like this video, share it with someone you think needs to hear it, and please subscribe to the channel. It means the world to me to know that I'm not alone in this. And maybe we can all learn something together.